and welcome to the panel on Geopoetics on the theme of regional ecology and poetics. And my name is Gordon Miller, and I'm Director of the Environmental Studies program here at CLU, which was co-founded by David McCloskey. And really, I think he was the original visionary of our program. Not long ago, I found in kind of the program archives the founding document of the program, and it was a brainstorming session. Yeah, David knows. It was the record of a brainstorming session back 20 years ago. The program's 20 years old, and it's a very interdisciplinary program. So it was this diagram with all kinds of subject areas and themes and things, all connected by different lines and things like that. I felt like I had found the fountainhead, of it. And actually, we're still aspiring to as many of those things as possible. We're not quite there yet, but we're trying to get there. So anyway, thanks for that, David. Okay, so before we go to our panelists, and unfortunately, Daphne Marlett couldn't be here. She's ill. But I just wanted for a few short minutes for us to listen to some of the original voices of Cascadia. So I have a little bit of a soundscape here for us to enjoy. Some other original, although maybe not quite so primordial, voices of Cascadia. So first of all, Derek Sheffield, native Northwesterner, grew up in Portland, got an MFA from University of Washington Creative Writing Program, and also a master's in teaching here from CLU. And has been widely published in leading literary magazines, too many to name. And in terms of some of his awards, the Hazel Lippa Environmental Chapbook Award, the Sparrow Prize in Poetry, the James Hurst Poetry Prize, judged by Lee Young Lee. It was runner-up for the 2012 Emily Dickinson First Book Award and finalist for the Walt Whitman Award. He's professor of English at Wenatchee Valley College. I guess I should. So, and lives at the foothills of the Cascade Mountains in near Leavenworth, where he is a birder, active birder, leads bird watching hikes and participates in the Audubon, the annual Audubon bird count. And also recently published Through the Second Skin, poems by Derek Sheffield. Okay, and so our other panelists today, Renee Saklikar, comes to us from Vancouver, by way of many other places in her life. One of her, she was trained as a lawyer at the University of British Columbia, and then also finished a qualification in creative writing at Simon Fraser University. One of her, I guess, her primary activity is to write the Canada Project, which is a lifelong poem and poetry. It's poetry and also essays about her life, kind of from India to Canada, and some of the other places she's lived along the way, which are many, such as Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, Northern Ontario, Northern Quebec, Montreal, Saskatchewan, and British Columbia. And this, the Canada Project has resulted in many publications in literary magazines. Also, most recently, a book, Children of the Air, which is related to the bombing of Air India Flight 182 in 1985 off the coast of Ireland. And her aunt and uncle were aboard that flight and died along with the 327 other passengers on board. And this book has been shortlisted for the Dorothy Livesey Poetry Prize. And she also coordinates at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver the Lunch Poem Series, which she sees as an opportunity to really enjoy the music of poetry. So, okay, that's just a little bit on them. There are many other accomplishments are kind of too many to list. And I think we're going to start with Renee and then go to Derek.
Well, thank you. Can everyone hear me? Yeah, if I keep it real close. I want to thank the conference, Paul, and all the organizers. Thank you, Gord, for that really rather wonderful intro with the audio and the very thoughtful introduction. Great to be here with my fellow panelists. Derek, I see that you've been published in one of my favorite magazines, Origen, so that's pretty cool. I'm going to get started and begin with an opening statement that I've been thinking about quite a bit since Paul did me the great honor of asking me to be part of this particular panel here at this wonderful, wonderful place of learning. I want to also acknowledge all the very fine poets, some of whom I know here. And so thinking about regional ecology and poetics, there are three animating questions I wanted to put forward for your consideration this morning. What is left out? Can we write about place and the pastoral without what the American poet Banu Kapil calls humanimals? And a sub-part of question 2 then for your consideration this morning is, if humanimals are to be considered part of pastoral, your third question, our third point of meditation is what is not seen, what is not spoken, which is really a reflection back in a circular way on the first animating question, what is left out? So what is left out? Can we write about the pastoral without humanimals? And then what is not seen? So what I'd like to present to you is a case study based on some of my work with the Canada Project. And I'll read a little bit of poetry in the middle of that, and then I'll stop, and then maybe through our discussion and our animation of our work, we can weave back in with the poems. So as part of my case study for you, I have the following rubrics, if you like, thinking about specifically Cascadia, and I want to dedicate this to Paul for his very beautiful introduction to this poetry festival. And I just read you, I'm sure everyone's read it, but it so struck me again today as I reread this. The challenges of our time are intense. Climate change, historically radical economic inequality, and massive species extinction, to name 3. So I find this very exciting and very challenging, even though, of course, the work in front of us has never been so anxiety-inducing as it is now. And I want to thank Paul, and I think you're also gesturing to David McCloskey and all the work that's been done right in this locale. But to include historically radical economic inequality seems to me a subversive act in the mainstream discussion, if I can call it that, of ecopoetics, where too often questions of class, and I'll say it very gently, because it's just scary to talk about, right? The things that are not spoken, race, are somehow not engendered into discussions of ecopoetics. So, thank you. So our rubrics for today, where Cascadia is region, think Spain, think Japan, think United States, think Britain, think Russia, think Haida, and many other coastal First Nations. These are all steeply hierarchical cultures around the Pacific Rim. So that is the rubric I call region, empire's edge, sites of trauma. The second rubric, methods. And Joanne Arnott, a poet I think extremely highly of, who was speaking just in the panel earlier. Forgive me if some of this is repeat, because my husband was kindly driving me down from Vancouver early this morning, so I missed it. But I see this as in communion with our conversation about empire. So method, if we're thinking about region as empire's edge here in Cascadia, then method is the club. The family compact, what is in, what is out, and what the British Empire, and I would argue the American Empire has done, whether it's Jim Crow or cantonment and the civil lines. Think about our space is in terms of what is in and what is out. We have essentially white Seattle, white Vancouver, and white Portland, and what I am embodying for you today, gently, is, proportionality in terms of who is living where and what color are they, and does this have any connection to these beautiful primordial soundscapes we heard, where we have our advanced species extinction. And so too often in ecopoetics, what I am experiencing is a seclusion of these forces that I think have to be integrated. The disappearance of a white working class in these lumber and fishing towns all up and down the coast. So one of my preoccupations for ecopoetics and the pastoral is almost not there. Almost not there. And in the glorious anthology that I think I have in the bag, I forgot to bring it up here, I'm gesturing to where my husband is. Do you want to just hold up the Arcadia project? This is an amazing American anthology of eco-poetics that's really educating me. And Juliana Spar, that I know many of you will know, she has that glorious poem that I'm riffing on when I speak to you, Gentle Now, Don't Add to Heartache, with all the names of the species and animals and flora and fauna that are going extinct before us. And so my challenge is, how do we talk about humanimals and division of empire, race and class, who's in, who's out, within that eco-poetics? I just think there is such a gap there. Okay, so we have region, we have methods, and then we have ecology. And for me, the pastoral, as I am defining it for your consideration, is about loss, is about erasure, is about not seeing, is about redaction, is about silence. Case study. And this can be found online. It was published as an essay by Portland's wonderful Hooligan Press as part of their Pacific Poetry Project. And I'll just read a little bit from that and then the poem. These layers that now surround us. Where begins the poem? Inside, outside. Growing up on this west coast, coming from the prairies, born over there, Pune, India, where empire too separated inside from outside, I did not always think about layers. Only when writing the Canada Project did layers present as subjects, they who are unspoken. So too, the more I looked at objects, they emanated an ecology of included, excluded that demanded manifestation. Such signs would speak to me of time marked as year, month, day. Each marker carried inside its shell the stories of other people, your stories. And the more I listened to all of us, the more the edges of the line mattered. Layered into story, conditions ongoing, rain, cherry blossoms, a river. The next growing season, a glossary. Dimension, March 2007. Sound, Trans-Canada Highway. Story, Abbotsford. Context, farming. Vehicle, tractor, transmitter, siren. Sound, churches, gurdwaras. Materials, baggy pants, tunic, scarves. Story, Amarjeet Kaur Ball, 52. Exhibit, kill, valley, corn, cabbage heads, water. Story, Sarojini Kaur Sidhu, 31. Exhibit, kill, transaction, farm worker, choice, organic. Materials, local, field, agrochemicals. Story, Abbotsford. Story, Sukwinder Kaur Punya, 46. Exhibit, kill, sound, Trans-Canada Highway. Material, seatbelts, unauthorized interjection, March 1914, Echo. We want no interference with our laboring classes, the Vancouver Sun. Material, farmer, dimension, March 2010, sound, ceremony, sadness, cherry blossoms, ballet, Amarjeet, Sarojini, Sukwinder. Broadcast, the correct pronunciation, Abbotsford, not Abbotsford. Field, mother, daughter, aunt. Sound, grandfather, daughter, cousin. Object, 3 photographs, 1 memorial. Subject, their story, our story, their story, time and its dimensions.
Ornithology 101. Now that you have staked their skeletons, eyed the scope of a throat, prodded strutted white ribs, pinched a wishbone for resilience, thumbed a keeled sternum's edge, still trying to steer scattered feathers, stroked a hummingbird's mum iridescence, roughed the white down of a great egret, slit and stuffed as last year's final project, sprinted with a severed wing to catch the physics, given new vision to a blackbird with 2 dabs of cotton. You can leave with an A in Class A's. Now that you have looked through birds, you see the diagrammatic movements of geese across the blue sky, dotted lines narrowing a million years. You expect from every American goldfinch thistles and sadness, and when you walk out among the world's perches and latinate streaks at the edge of sight, the air is feathers measuring the bones of your face. I want to thank Paul Nelson and all his wonderful volunteers who put the Cascadia Poetry Festival together. It is nice to be back at this lovely campus. As Gordon mentioned, I earned a master in teaching degree here, and boy, it's a marvelous program. This is a beautiful place. It was some of the best teaching I've ever experienced happened when I was a student here. So I like these Jesuits. So I have a few thoughts here about what poetry and ecology have in common. Poets keep a notebook with us wherever we go. Many of us do. Most of us do. And even if their notebook happens to be scraps of random paper they've ripped from one thing or another. In ecology, we have the Field Journal using the Grinnell system created by Joseph Grinnell. In poetry, we're often obsessed over the right word for something. You might think of it as Adam's task. Thinking about the right name for a thing. In ecology, we use the Linnaean Latin binomial system for identifying species, for naming species. When you are making a poem, you have no idea where it will take you. You do not know where the language will end up. It is a discovery process. There is a wildness to making poems. The way I think most of us do it in following the process, the writing process, and drafting, and being sort of that mad person just putting down whatever comes to you in the initial stages of crafting. And that makes me think of Thoreau's dictum, "In wildness is the preservation of the world." And I was also thinking about him listening to that loon calling earlier. He said that perhaps that loon call is the wild sound wall. I was thinking about that contention as I was listening to the wolves too. I don't know. In ecology, you never know where the field trip is going to take you. You never know where that walk in the woods is really going to lead. Even if you're out on a hike and you're following a trail cut in by some rangers, there's always discovery. And you never know what you're going to see. And what's going to see you. I am haunted by the certainty that I have never seen a cougar in the wilderness, but I am certain I have been in the eyesight of many a cougar. Poetry, as I said, is process-centered, going from drafting to revision to some form of publication where you share it with other people. In ecology, there are processes that involve the system of formulating theories, the scientific method. There's a process there going from hypothesis to theory, to law. And also evolution is a process that we consider when we encounter species out there. A poem, it seems to me, is a community of sounds. There's a focus on the interrelationships of the sounds in a poem. And also what they look like, too. Everything about the language is a community of things. These words and sounds, these lines, interrelationships. And that is the focus in ecology. When we study how species interrelate, how the biotic and the abiotic elements affect one another. A meadow is a community of species. It seems to me that poetry focuses on questions. We ask questions. We try things out in poetry. We ask, what if? Science, many people don't realize this, but science is more about the questions than the answers. Scientists are the first one to raise the questions. What's this? It seems to me that poetry is like a tonic for us, and as we write it and as we read it. I read poetry to be in the presence of the other, to know that I'm not alone. When I read, you might come here Sunday on a whim, say your life broke down. The last good kiss you had was years ago. You walked these streets laid out by the insane, past hotels that didn't last, bars that did, the tortured try of local drivers to accelerate their lives. I read that poem, Degrees of Grey in Phillipsburg by Richard Hugo, and I know I'm not alone. In ecology, it is a tonic to be in the presence of other species. To hear bird song, frog croak, wolf howl, coyote yip, etc. I took my daughters to the zoo yesterday, which is a rare treat for us. As Gordon mentioned, I live on the east side, and the gorillas were our favorites. It is astonishing. And there's something paradoxical, too, about poetry and ecology and about us as, using Renee's term, humanimals, and looking into the gorilla's eyes and seeing the other and seeing ourselves, too, and being comfortable with that paradox and knowing it. Wow. It seems to me that making poems and reading poems is an optimistic act. It's inherently optimistic. We're creating something. We're working towards some kind of knowing. Chase Lomilo said that every poem is an act of failed ultimate, trying to achieve is a failed act of trying to achieve some ultimate reality, something like that. And in ecology, we're very well aware of, I think it was E.O. Wilson who coined the term biophilia, the love of other lives. Occurs to me that our species are endangered, and poetry is endangered. Poetry is an endangered species. I was thinking about how Earth Day is in Poetry Month, and you know we do like Black History Month, February. We give a month or a day to something when we feel guilty about it. And of course, if you've seen the bumper sticker, art is in Earth. I have a few quotes to share with you from some of my teachers. William Stafford, in his poem, Lake Chelan, writes, "They call it regional, this relevance. The deepest place we have, in this pool, forms the model of our land, a lonely place, a lonely one, responsive to the wind. Everything we own has brought us here. From here we speak." And it was only when I was going back to this poem and writing out this passage again that I noticed what he was doing with the punctuation. There's a dash and there are a couple of colons and interrelationship, right? And one thing's filling into the next. It's really quite amazing. Gary Snyder begins his poem, "What You Should Know to Be a Poet," this way. "All you can know about animals as persons. The names of trees and flowers and weeds. The names of stars and the movements of planets and the moon. Your own six senses with a watchful, elegant mind. Ted Retke writes, "I need the botanist's leaf more than the poet's flower." E.O. Wilson says, "The scientist needs the poet's imagination." Vladimir Nabokov writes, advises his students to write with the passion of a scientist and the precision of a poet. Chris Wyman says, "Let us remember that in the end we go to poetry for the reason that we might more fully inhabit our lives and the world in which we live them. And if we more fully inhabit these things, we might be less apt to destroy them." And I would like to finish my part here today with another poem. Darwin's Eyes. He kept seeing himself, a swallow peeking from its nest, moss, the crawl of a wasp across his study window. And he kept having to drop everything and duck as certain callers appeared in the mirror he'd aimed at the front door. A beak he could understand. A talon was a hand holding his own. It was the eye with its vicious complexity that stabbed at him. Lightning bolts of doubt, a cyclopean stare, 10 years is Origen stewing in a stack of notes. And the eye, perhaps, why he went back, after all was said and begun, to the worms, spending his last years watching them as his fingers wriggled over piano keys, exploring up the scales and down, concerto and dirge. His first passion, his final, those tender needles with their dark impulse to feel all around them our earth.
Questions, comments, discussion? I would just open it up.
Play the songs. That was awesome.
The first question you raised, basically what is being left out, what are we not hearing? And one can account that by power editing a light in the world. But there's also our own categories, our own ways of thinking, which we're held captive by a whole worldview that we take for granted. So then we come over here. I always had the feeling, hiking or climbing, that the woods were looking back at you. And the higher the trail up they got, the more the birds, everything started to sing, that the world was first speaking and singing to you. And that listening is the source of the poesis. So the poet is the first learns to listen, especially to a world in depth that we have forgotten how to even speak to. What do you think of that? Ramble.
I would agree. I mean, I think the challenge sometimes is a recognition of the subjectivity of that stance. So the world is always speaking, I think, and the earth is always speaking, and how the self interacts with that. And so if our self if we don't consider the implication of ourselves as flawed, as in need of grace, then there's a tendency to just think that whatever I'm perceiving, even if I'm quite a mindful person and listening to, if we like, the first songs, the first messages, then I might miss things, as we do miss things all the time. And so, that mindfulness, how much am I willing to implicate myself in, for instance, being trapped by categories?
What if the self weren't the prime reference?
Yes, absolutely, but how and when and who makes those determinations is, I think, of interest to me anyway. Yeah, and if one obliterates self, which can be very helpful and maybe necessary, how does that work for humanity? You know, is there a way to consider humanity in an ecopoetics history especially, I would think.
I was thinking about what you were saying, and it reminded me of the fact that the first ornithologists, well, we all kind of were back then, but people recording observations of birds were poets. Before ornithology became a science, sort of more official, was amateurs, and a lot of them were poets. People like John Clare. John Clare, yeah. Who, the peasant poet, who recorded in his poems and notebooks a lot of ornithology. I don't think he thought of it that way. He was just paying attention. He was just inhabiting his senses and just noticing, And that's the thing too about what I was thinking about what you said. The world comes alive when we stop and just listen. And when you're still, you just go out there and you're still. Even out here on the campus, and just watch and listen for a while and have your senses. That's the key to the kingdom right there.
Yeah, and acting as your provocateur this morning, I would say that the listening of the world, the question I would offer for us is, where is beauty? Is it in the back alley, in the concrete? Is it in this, this is a gorgeous campus. Is it in green? I think we have a deep hunger for green and trees especially, I think. Is there also, it's not a but is there a place for the holy or the eco-poetic in the humanimal, in the flaws of humanimal? And again, I can feel even now, I can feel shying away from it, and I feel, no, I'm called to not shy away from the difficult discussion. What about race and class in eco-poetics? Yeah, no, I gotta put that up there.
I would recommend to you another couple of publications here, and that is Black Nature by Camille Dungy.
Yeah.
That she edited, speaking to that question, and also the EcoPoetry Anthology, edited by Ann Fisherworth and Laura Graystreet, with an introduction by Robert Hass. And Pilgrimage magazine, which focuses more on the spiritual aspects of ecological writing. And I should say terrain.org, write down terrain.org. I have to, oh, is it? Renee said it's fantastic. Okay, so, yeah.
Okay, we have a question right here.
Yes, I want to answer one of Renee's questions and make an extension to it. Can we speak of pastoral without humanimals? The answer is no, we can't. But the humanimals inhabit an ecology which is not only a natural ecology, but also the ecology of the built environment, of vehicles, etc. But unfortunately, there are the men and maybe some women of power, economic and political power, and they don't see either the ecology or the humanimals as ecology. They see them as resources for their own projects. So what do we do about that?
Do we do
Well, I think other species and poor people Yes, sir.
Just a, comment, experience I had. I'm from New England. And, Vermont is in some ways a little bit like Cascadia. Everybody talks about the working landscape there. It really has been shaped by, the history and agriculture and so forth. And so I'm hiking, on the long trail or something, and here's a little, encampment of a couple of tents, and this woman came over, to talk to us, and she was living. That's where they were living for until the winter, in the woods, using the brook for water, and I guess they came up to use the privy that the Forest Service put in there. But she was like this solitary, she and her boyfriend, these solitary organisms, and they were really part of the forest until the weather would drive them back to Rutland or someplace like that. And those are really unseen people. Rural poverty is unbelievable, and and a lot of the people are very isolated, and they're finding a way to to survive out there. It's very interesting.
It is very interesting. Yeah, I think one of the poets, Kim Goldberg, has that incredible book, Red Zone, about the homeless cultures and peoples of Nanaimo. So, yeah, and maybe it's about, a listening scene of what is always being extracted, species, including human animals, and the challenge of that.
I have a question for Derek. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of the exercises and experiences you've had with your students taking them up into the wilderness for the first time, some of the things you do to help people get a greater understanding of where they are and how that transfers into their writing on these experiences. If you can think of sometimes some students that really kind of blossomed right in front of you and some of the exercises that you did.
Yeah. The biggest exercise is just breaking down the classroom walls and getting off campus. That's the big thing. I mean, our curriculum is the planet, and so when summer quarter, I get to teach this learning community. Maybe you're referring to with Dr. Dan Stevens, a biologist, and we're both present the whole time, and we combine writing with Field Ecology, and so most of the magic happens. I mean, we just kind of get credit really for getting them out there, driving them up to Blue Earth Pass and Stevens Pass, and taking them out to the trails that we have, and we let the other than human world do the work, the heavy lifting. And I was thinking too while we were talking, and I appreciate the element that Renee is bringing to the discussion here. I was thinking, for one of my students last summer, his first real experience out in the woods was, and he's a minority student, was through the penal system. He had, instead of going to prison, he was able to go to this rehab program where they took these juvenile offenders out in the woods and camped, and they worked hard, and that helped him decide to enroll in our Northwest Nature Writing class. And the way he talked about that program is it really worked. It changed him to get him so that he saw that there was more than the anthropogenic environment out there, and he continued that with us. I do just some exercises of descriptive writing. It's really important to describe well. you know, and go back to showing and not telling, and, you know, we can't, that's a tough one. It's easy to hear, but it's a tough one to learn, so, we do some exercises like that. And we try to pay attention to, we do some close reading of the field guide we use by Daniel Matthews, Natural History of the Cascade Olympics. It's just terrific. It's really well written. And so some close reading, and we try to pay the kind of attention to the language in our field guide and in our model essays that we do to when they learn a new species. And they're responsible for learning about 200 species in the quarter, and that they'll be tested on. And whatever we encounter becomes part of the curriculum. And so one year we had a yearling black bear walk through our group. We've had a rattlesnake slither in. One time at the top of Blewett Pass, half of our number had passed a 2-week-old elk, and until someone, and this elk was lying 5 feet off the trail, and it was so cryptically colored that 15 people had gone by and not seen the thing that close. It was astonishing. So, yeah, and if you want some more specifics, I can come up with some if you email me. And also, there's a lot on our website that's accessible.
Okay, we need to wrap it up, so anyway, thanks for coming.
Yeah.